Hey, we wanted to pop in at the beginning of the video to give a little disclaimer. We are going to be throwing around some really big numbers. Working on this project means that we've had to get comfortable with those, but we realize it's pretty weird to hear us mention spending an average household's annual income on just cabinets. I used to live in an actual cardboard house.
We are so fortunate to be able to have the resources and privilege to be able to actually build this project, but we hope hearing about the budget is useful and interesting, even if it is not accessible to most people.
You know, with the current housing shortage, one part of the solution is just building more housing. So there's lots of different types of housing, not just mega luxury apartment blocks or single family homes.
When this project is done, 4 families will be able to live on this lot. It had just one house before with a failing foundation and asbestos.
So will this triplex solve the housing crisis? No, but we hope that being open about the expenses and the costs of building will give some insight into why there isn't more of this missing middle housing.
And one last thing to remember is that all of these numbers are divisible by 3. So while the total budget is very high, it ends up being about $500,000 per 2 or 3 bedroom unit that we're building, which is actually lower than the median cost in Portland.
Hello and welcome to The House Files, a podcast about building a triplex in Portland, Oregon.
Which primarily exists to talk you out of doing it.
And I think you'll be decently well talked out of it today.
Today we're gonna throw out a whole bunch of very large numbers.
Essentially, people keep asking, how much is all this costing? And the answer is, we don't exactly know. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna walk through the budget step by step, how much we have spent thus far. And I believe we are also going to talk about how much we have budgeted left. And we're not going to get too deep into the financing, just because I think that that's complicated and for another episode.
It's another story.
But we'll give you a little bit of the overview of how the financing worked.
Yeah, so we'll talk about what we spent so far to get to the point of what you see around here.
Which looks beautiful.
And also where we've overspent already. Mm-hmm. And then talk about what's left in the budget to spend and what else we need to do around here to finish this up.
So that isn't clickbait. We actually have now spent and officially crossed the $1 million mark of the budget. If you're new here and you don't know, this is a 3-unit building. And the top unit is where we're gonna live, which is where we are standing right now.
Yeah. We are not done. We still have more to spend, as you can clearly tell.
The good news is that more than $1 million was our original budget. So we're not out of budget yet. However, we have quite a few areas that we went over in. So the first part was actually not even included in part of our financing, which was the permits.
$83,000, which was just the fee to the city for the permits. That is, we're just skipping right past the whole design phase and architecture fees and all that. But even just starting with the permits, $83,000 to the city, including fees for parks and things like that.
So that includes system development charges and all of those kinds of things, but.
We had to spend that to get the permit so that the bank could give us the loan. So bank did not want to give a giant loan for plans that were not approved. So that was step 1.
And so that did not come out of the mortgage.
Right. So after that, we're able to close the loan and start spending money from the loan instead of just cash.
And the way that it works with the loan is that our general contractor essentially spends out of this budget and gets a draw each month from the bank off of what our total balance is. We'll talk about the mechanics of that in a different video, but I do think it is important to understand that this is kind of coming out in chunks in these categories.
$11,625.
And that was construction overhead. So that's all of the things like porta potties, temporary fencing.
The parking permits.
Parking permits, because we're in a very dense area and we don't have a driveway. So anything that needs to be put out there, a dumpster, the deliveries, all of that, we have to have a reserved spot on the street.
Then we're ready to actually start doing things that actually look like a house, starting with $90,000 for the foundation.
And I don't I don't think there were no surprises, right? It was on budget and it was just what we expected.
Yeah, no real surprises there. Just a couple of mistakes, but we've worked through those by now.
And that was like radon mitigation and stuff like that, right?
That was planned. The mistake was that things were built at slightly wrong heights, which is why we have a landing downstairs in Unit B and missing a step in our entryway and things like that. But it all worked out.
Okay, $188,000 is how much we spent on framing.
That was the first large chunk of money to be spent, and we did go over budget on that already by $23,500.
And there are a lot of reasons, some of which are our fault, why the framing went over. A lot of what made framing costs go up was that there were so many rounds of back and forth between the architect, the engineering firm, and the city in regards to permitting and zoning that sometimes what would happen is changes that didn't affect like whether or not we would get the permit wouldn't always make it through to the plans. And so the plans would match in essence, but there would be really minor framing differences that weren't on the plans that the framing crew was using.
Yeah, so they had to redo a couple of things every here and there. That wasn't like the main thing that caused it to go over budget. The main thing was that the original crew that the contractor wanted to use was not available when we were ready to finally start. So we just had to find a different crew on pretty short notice, and they were just more expensive. So it's kind of not super fun that it was just a more expensive crew.
And I think one of the challenges here when it comes to the labor is that there's a limit to how much you can shop around because every couple weeks delay it costs money too. So you're like, oh, I'm going to wait for a cheaper crew or a cheaper plumber or whatever. But if that causes everything else down the line to move, sometimes you just gotta move on it. Yep. Which is also why we have a general contractor, and it's their job to worry about that.
The next number, $33,000. That is for all of the roofing. It's a couple different parts of the roofing. So there's a bunch of layers that go down, and the roofing encompasses the shingle roof that you would expect to see, as well as the roof decks. So our rooftop patio is technically a roof because it is the waterproofing layer between that and the kitchen. So that number covers all of those parts of the house.
And we just had a pretty big storm here, and the kitchen didn't flood, so that's good.
Yeah, that's good. Only one minor drip coming down right over there, which it turns out is because the railing around the roof isn't actually finished yet. So some of the water snuck down on the outside of the house, luckily, but made it into here. So they're fixing that.
Okay, $54,000 is the next number.
And that is for windows. There's a lot of windows. There's just a lot.
Well, and there's a lot less windows than there were in the original plan.
It's true. So that actually probably came down compared to what it would have cost originally, because we had to shrink a bunch of the windows because of fire code. So because of how close it is to the next lot, there's certain sizes of openings that are required. So we had to get rid of a couple, shrink a couple, but we only went $300 over budget in that category. The $300 was the change fee for swapping the bedroom from a door and window to a double door.
And we had issues with the windows, but it was their fault, so...
Yeah, there were some, I think we've talked about it in some of the past episodes, but there were a couple of complicated, this is not in the right spot, this is the wrong size. So there was some period of time where there was just one window missing because we had to wait for it to come back in stock. Yeah. And actually then there's another problem, which is at some point, one of the contractors in here punched a hole in that window and broke that glass, and now that's going to have to get replaced before we're done.
Great, giant
but
window.
we don't pay for that because that's building error.
So, and all of the windows we went with a local supplier, which is pretty common for windows just because it costs a lot of money to ship windows. So you want to do it somewhere local. And
we went with the black
trim, which did bring the price up a little bit. And we went for the black trim on the windows where we felt like it would make a difference. So that was one of the big like design things that I heard from architecture design blogs and everything, was that like if you can spend a little bit more money on the window trim, it really shows. But we didn't do it for all the windows.
No, it is all the windows.
Oh, but we didn't do the like extra frames and stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So we don't have any of the, I forget what it's called now, when there's the strip inside the glass. So these are all just whole
divided
panes.
light or
Divided
whatever.
lights.
Yeah. 11,348 is the next number, and that is for solar panels.
And this is actually only part of the cost of the solar panels. There's actually $20,000 in the budget for that, and that is going to a completely separate company that just does solar panels, and they did all the electrical for it as well. So they came out and did the rough part, which is essentially running their conduit through the walls, and it's like the deposit on it. So all we have here right now is a couple of wires in the wall, so you can't see most of where that money went, but it's the down payment for the rest of it, and we will have about $9,000 left to spend before we are done with that project. The next big number, $122,500, and that is for the siding. Everything on the outside. This part also took quite a long time because it's pretty complicated configuration. It's not just a couple of rectangles, and they're also not quite done yet. So I think all the payments already all been sent, but they have to come back and finish a couple of loose ends here and there. One of the things they haven't done yet is at the front of the house where the electrical meter goes, we're still waiting for the meter to show up, and that has to get put in like with the siding around it, so they can't just put the siding on and then cut it out later. So they can't finish that part of the house yet. And then a couple of the balconies are still missing the trim pieces for the cap and things like that.
Yep.
So
47,835, which is plumbing.
Plumbing is a pretty broad category. So what we've done so far is this number includes all of the rough, but none of the fixtures. So this does not include the actual fixtures of things that you would actually hold. It's just the labor and material of everything that goes into the walls. But it does include it's all of just the household plumbing. This sprinkler system is a separate category. And this did go over budget, mostly my fault. This was $2,800 over budget for a couple of reasons. One is because I really wanted the wet bar to have a little faucet water on the counter for the appliance garage in case we ever wanted to do a plumbed in espresso machine. I also at the last minute said—
Did you spend $2,800 on a possible espresso machine?
No, it was only a couple hundred.
Okay.
Yeah. The next step up from that was on the roof, I wanted to do an exterior shower head for rinsing off before the hot tub.
Showers are apparently the most expensive part of all plumbing.
Yeah, and that's again
not
including the shower head either. So that's just to get the pipes up there. But now we have pipes that run up to the roof for water up on the rooftop, which I think is a good idea. But the biggest extra overhead that went into that plumbing category is actually because the building that we moved into, the loft next door, we actually had to redo the way that sewer line drains into the main sewer. Because it used to come out at like ground level, which is 4 feet above the sewer. Now that ground level is actually too high. We have to drop the ground lower in order to make the rest of the yard work. So they had to bury that sewer line 3 feet deep. So a little bit extra went into that project. $58,000 for electrical. This is also a pretty big category. There's a lot of electrical in here, and most of it's planned. I told them in advance that we're going to do a lot of electrical work in here, but one of the things that didn't quite make it into that first list, which is now the reason we are $10,000 over budget on this, is the staircase lighting. Every step has a little wire running to it for a LED light on each tread, but each of those wires runs down underneath individually, from all the way up there to all the way down here into this under the stair cavity, so that each step can be lit separately.
I think he may have made the electrician very mad.
Or very happy because it's a fun project.
Sure,
Yeah, we'll go with that one.
That's a view.
And then the other part of the stairs that is TBD still is the wooden vertical slats they're going to run here and on that side. And those have an LED strip at the bottom and the top. So the electrical covered all that. Also,
They're not to be decided. They are decided.
TB
built.
TB spent. To be
TBB.
spent. To be built, yes.
To be built.
They are now actually designed. Other electrical things, so that's all the wiring for all the lights and switches and for the shades, automatic shades that are going to go up on these big windows. And that one actually was carefully chosen to not put shades in every window because it was expensive to do those runs. So it's just the windows that are south and west facing or that we can't reach.
But it doesn't include the shades, does it?
No.
Yeah. Which are going to be...
Because that's...
We might be buying those for like our 1 year...
Yeah.
1 year in the house.
Yeah.
$14,500 for the Dumbwaiter. So this is the Dumbwaiter in my office. And we almost cut this part of the Dumbwaiter project because it costs more for every floor that it stops on. But it goes from the ground floor to here to the kitchen to the roof.
$11,200 for low voltage. So that is Ethernet and TV wiring for all the units. This category is not over budget because I may have snuck in a few wires into the walls myself. So after we scoped out the original project with the guy who's doing the low voltage, after a couple months later, I was like, you know what? I'm going to regret it if I don't put a few extra wires in the walls. So I did things like an extra wire over here, an extra wires in the ceiling. There's ceiling microphones. There's extra cameras on the roof. So I'm comfortable running low voltage myself. I think I did a perfectly fine job.
We'll find out.
We'll find out.
The ceiling microphones sound very Soviet spy.
Yeah, but it's for the voice assistant. So the whole house is a giant voice assistant. It's all going to be running locally. It's all going to be, in the server here. It's not cloud-based at all. It'll be great.
Yeah, no Bezos.
Yep.
No Bezos home assistant. $49,456. That's HVAC.
So that is the mini splits, heating and cooling, and vents for the dryer and bathroom fans and things like that. This did go over budget, and that is our fault because we actually changed a couple of things about it. We added the unit because I realized that once we had the karaoke room framed, it was very hot in the summer when the sun was shining in because it is south facing. And I was like, we're going to regret not having a unit in there.
And we're doing mini splits, not centralized.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a vent in there.
Right, no vent in there. So there's a whole separate mini split head in there, which required a new run and a bigger unit on the outside. And the other thing we're getting is called an ERV, which is going to sit up in the attic up there. And it is a air recirculator to the outside. So it brings in fresh air, but it cools it or warms it to room temperature on the way in or out, so that you bring in fresh air, but it's at the same temperature that's already inside. So I'm pretty excited about that. And that's actually not a huge extra cost. The main extra cost was the bigger.
Well, and theoretically, that is an upfront investment that's going to lower some of our ongoing costs because it's theoretically going to help with lowering the energy that we're using to power the other units.
Right, and it means that like in the summer, instead of opening a window to get fresh air, you just turn this thing on, but then you're not wasting all of your cool air and having to cool down again.
Yeah.
$19,800 for the sprinkler system. The sprinkler system is something we had to do because of the way this building is laid out between the three different units. They share ceilings and floors, not just walls, and that means we had to do a sprinkler system. It's a chunk of change, but compared to some of the other things we've spent, like going $18,000 over budget on framing, I'm actually pretty happy about it because it is safer, and it means we have much better fire safety in here.
And this can essentially be summed up by this is required under the commercial code, and we're having to build under the commercial code, which is, this is probably, would you say this is the largest single expense that we have specific to the commercial code?
Single expense, yes. I think there was some extra cost in the framing because of all the additional like shear walls and things that you need and separation, and also drywall because every wall between units has 2 layers of drywall instead of 1. We did go over budget on this, but only a little bit, and that was because as soon as they put the sprinklers in, I was like, why did you put in the sprinklers that stick out? Like someone's going to hang something on that like a hook. Also, they look ugly. I was like, put in the ones that sit flush at the ceiling, and they only drop down when they're active. And apparently those cost more. So $1,800? Yeah, $1,800 more. I think it's
$1,800, I feel like.
fine about it.
I feel very good about that. $35,800 is how much we spent on insulation.
It's a lot, but there is a lot of stuff to insulate. Again, between every unit, floor, and ceiling. This did go over budget by $3,800.
Which is a lot.
Which is kind of a lot. The reason for that was because of just the cost of the rock wool insulation went up compared to when he had originally bid it. And also because of the commercial code, between every floor, there's actually special fire resistant insulation in every single gap. So when you look at all the like holes for wiring and stuff, all of those are filled with this special goo that's fire resistant. And that was a requirement that apparently he hadn't factored into the original cost.
Yeah. The last thing that we have spent thus far
that you can see $28,750 for drywall.
And that's everywhere here.
There is the drywall. It's looking more like a house now, so that is the drywall.
Floors are looking
rough. But yeah, it's starting to finally come together. So that is this is in progress right now. So this is the first stage of the drywall, which is just putting the panels up, getting the little corner bits done, and then they're going to come through and do the taping and mudding to smooth it all out later. But we need to fix a couple little details here and there before they can do that, because there's a couple mistakes, as always happens with drywall. But it's all easy to fix right now. And also good timing for that freeze, because as you can see on the ceiling, they had to take that panel down because it got water damage from the roof that leaked. And this was a great time to have that happen.
Yeah, it's better than
it's all finished up.
Yeah, the finished carpentries happened or whatever. So
that's where we're at right now. There are a couple of categories that we spent that you can't see yet. We'll just quickly go through those. $40,500. That's all the bathroom fixtures. We actually did buy those already, and they're sitting in storage. And that's because turns out a lot of the fixtures are the wall side and the side you see are actually one piece you buy together. So we had to just buy everything. $58,766 for cabinets.
Which is going up.
Going up?
It's going up every month.
Oh, right. So the cabinets we actually bought too early because the cabinet company was going out of business and it was their last order. And then they got bought and they're not going out of business anymore. But what that meant is that they finished them way earlier than we need them. And now we have to pay for storage to store them. And
there's so many cabinets because it's 3 units.
Right.
And like we said, every wall is a cabinet. Yeah. Because there are so many cabinets, we could only go with a storage space that could have a semi-truck loaded. Right. So the access to storage meant that the storage space is a chunk of change.
Yeah.
So
every month. So hopefully we can finish this up to get the cabinets in.
I know. As soon as the floors are in, I think we can bring them in and just chuck them somewhere.
Speaking of flooring, $19,200 is the cost of the flooring.
Which
We've already spent it, and the flooring is actually here sitting down in the bottom unit and also in the warehouse for the bamboo floor that we have coming here. And $10,000 for the hot tub. So that is also pre-purchased, although it is not here. So that is the cedar tub that we're doing, not plexiglass or fiberglass.
Yeah.
Cedar tub with the electronics for it as well.
And it is significantly less because we don't have to pay for a crane to get it in because it's a rooftop hot tub. So, but because we chose a cedar hot tub, it can be carried up or put in the dumbwaiter when the dumbwaiter's in and assembled on the roof because they're individual panels, which was one of the deciding factors. We decided to spend a little more on the hot tub and less on a crane. Right,
yep. So that brings the total to just over $1 million. We're at $1.1 million spent so far. There's about $470,000 left in the budget.
Which sounds like a lot.
Sounds like a lot, but there's a lot of stuff to finish. So
we can't live in this yet.
We will hopefully post another update after we're a little bit farther along about how the rest of the budget went. But I am crossing my fingers we aren't too much over that.
Who's late this week?
Everybody's late this week. Last week, everything went on pause. Portland was covered in a layer of snow and ice. nothing could happen.
Literally, we could barely walk outside because the ice was like 2 inches thick.
Just slip as soon as you take a step anywhere. Also, inside this house was like 15 degrees Fahrenheit, below, below freezing for the entire week.
That's like for people that use Celsius instead of freedom units. That's like -8 Celsius. So it was very cold. It was very cold. So yeah.
Yep.
That was freezing. And what's our word of the week?
I think word of the week is million.
Yeah.
That's a word.
I can't believe we're in $1 million house that doesn't have floors. What didn't we know we needed to know?
Well, we were looking at this weather forecast coming up with this ice storm and had a moment of everything in the city is going to lose power because the trees are falling on power lines, and it was just a giant mess. We did not plan for actually having a backup power system in here. And the good news is, because we're looking at this drywall, it's not too late, and we are going to add a transfer switch up into the next to the panel. So we'll be able to basically flick a switch, plug in a generator, and power a bunch of circuits in the house. But we should have planned for that earlier, because now it's a little bit of undoing drywall to get it in, and we can't do it for the lower units just because of where those panels are. So we lucked out being able to do it up here. So should have planned that ahead of time.
So if the lower units lose power, we're just going to have to invite people up here.
Yeah.
But that's what you do anyway in a storm.
That's our episode.
I think that's it. Thanks for tuning in, and we will talk more about the financing soon, because we've been teasing that for ages, but I think actually now we're...
Yep, it'll be an interesting story. So how we were able to get a hold of $1.5 million to spend on this project.
Also, I think we're like tantalizingly close to 500 subscribers, and we said we were going to do a live stream at 500 subscribers. So check that out. So glad the kittens are not allowed in here.
This is the least kitten friendly right now.
Well, I think they would think it would be fantastic.
They would be covered in white dust forever.
They would be batting all of these like ends around.